All right, guys, I think we can start now. So welcome, everybody. And we are going to start our conversation related to how playing and primarily being a dungeon master can teach you a thing or two about being a UXer. This was kind of a big journey there's actually a couple people that are part of my current D&D campaign here right now. So that lovely chap, Ted Potter, is a part of my current, right here.
Thanks for outing me, buddy.
No problem, bud. And Jason. So about a year ago, Jason approached me and was mentioning that he wanted to start a D&D campaign. I have actually never played D&D, and I just decided, well, you know what? I'll be the DM, I guess. I'll do that. If only I knew, right? The depths of which I didn't know how deep actually the DM role truly went. And if you guys don't know, a DM means Dungeon Master. We'll get more into some of the weirder terminology as we go along. But one of the big things that kind of came about this is, as I started going through the process of creating our campaign, I started to notice that there was a lot of similarities to what I was doing on the campaign front to what I was doing at work. And the way that I approach our user-centric kind of process is very similar to how we constantly, as a DM, focus on our players. And that feedback loop that is associated with the player-to-DM relationship as our relationship with our users. So we'll kind of start with the basics, right? What is UX? And everyone kind of has a slightly different term or definition of what is UX. So I think UX refers to a person's perception and responses resulting from and use and or anticipated use of product, systems, or services. And I think more simply put, user experience is how we feel about every interaction you have with what is in front of you in the moment that you're using it, right? Really simple. Whatever you're doing is a part of the UX, whether you're picking up a glass at a restaurant and it maybe has a slanted style to it and you haven't seen it before, that can be a very unique and interesting experience too. How we interact with our modern day applications or the brand new iPhone 10 that was just announced. Things like that. And so part of this is kind of looking at the general user experience honeycomb. So I don't want to go into the whole aspect of this, but I'll kind of briefly talk about some of these pieces. So some of the stuff that we look at is useful, right? As practitioners, we can't be content to paint within the lines drawn by managers. We must have the courage and creativity to ask whether our products and systems are useful and to apply our knowledge and craft to the medium and help define new innovations. Some usable, this is just general ease of use of the software and really looking at some of those human factors. Desirability. Our quest for efficiency must be tempered by an appreciation for the power and value of imagery, identity, brand, and other elements of emotional design. Right? We're always very empathetic with our users, and that kind of is what makes us, I think it's what drives a lot of UX people, is really wanting to see your users truly enjoy what we craft. Findability. I mean, this can be a simple search or just how you navigate a website. Accessibility is just as our buildings have elevators and ramps, our website and software should have accessible pieces for the elderly or those that are disabled. Today, it's good business and ethical and kind of best practices to kind of look at more of the ethical standpoint of what we're creating. And credible, right? Credibility is something that is, I think, derived almost within the first 5 to 10 seconds of a user interacting with a website. And if we don't create that credibility right away, we can immediately lose a potential user. And lastly, valuable. Our sites and products must deliver value to our sponsors, stakeholders, and users. And for nonprofits, the UX must advance the mission. With for-profits, it must contribute to the bottom line and improve customer satisfaction. And at Neudesic, we use kind of our own 4D process. It's actually pretty widespread, but there's other variants of the same 4D process. And I think in UX, there's multiple ways to skin a cat. But for us, our primary 4D UX process consists of the discover phase. And some of the things you do in there is user research, right? And you look at the understanding the entire range of components that exist in the process of finding a solution to the problem. And then we have define, right? This is kind of our BA or kind of business analyst cap that we put on, and allows us to define the needs and requirements and recommendations to deliver a great and valuable product to our stakeholders. And then the design, which is information architecture and visual design, right? Creating those artifacts and looking at designing the style and really trying to find ways to create pleasing and impactful UI and products. And then, of course, delivering that final product, and whether that's going to be how we prototype and how we simulate things and how we code. Do you want to take this one, or should I?
So, what is Dungeons and Dragons?
Actually, by the way, who here has played D&D? Awesome.
Who's played recently?
I went to a live,
there you go.
show.
So,
all right, for those folks that haven't played D&D, how many of you guys are aware of D&D or were aware of D&D? Okay.
So just a really quick,
just slightly aware of
it exists somewhere. So just a quick recap for those who aren't intimately familiar with it. D&D it's a collective storytelling, team-based tabletop role-playing game. And that's the core of it, right? It's storytelling, getting everyone together and sort of building what you would consider a product, which is the game, together as a group. So you could tell a story about heroes or villains or politics. Anything that you can come up with creatively is part of this game. The Dungeon Master or the DM make determinations of outcomes based on rolls from the players, so they can roll for a specific action they request, and depending on what they roll, the DM will determine if it's succeeded or failed. And that's sort of the baseline mechanics of the game. There's more to that, but that is essentially D&D in a nutshell. There's math and storytelling.
Yeah, and to kind of give some examples of that, actually, you know what? Because we're going to be showing a video, I'll just let the video speak for itself and let you guys kind of experience that. So how does this all relate to the UX process? How does collective storytelling and being a DM really have anything to do with that 4D process that we kind of showed? And so the D&D process, not just for nerds, but it definitely helps. So the first thing we look at is kind of our connective thread to the discovery phase. Well, what I would like to call chapter 0. So this is defining your expectations, right? Just like a UXer in the discovery phase has to do tasks like user interviews and heuristic evaluations. We kind of do that. We try to get feedback from our players, and that really translates into the next phase. It helps guide us because we come up with hypotheses during this phase, and it helps in the following phase, which is the story creation phase or the world building phase. And this is where we define, we start to take all the data that we've collected from our users, and we start to define, well, what is that world? What is the play space that our players are going to be interacting in? We want to make sure that we're not creating, I don't know, goofy Candyland play style that nobody in the entire group wants to play in. I can see the excitement. I can see the excitement. If you want to. Therein lies the quandary, right? I mean, you could spend all this time creating something and no one's going to use it. And by the way, guys, feel free to, I want this to kind of be a little bit more of a conversation piece. So if you guys have a interesting story to tell or something that relates to our conversations here, feel free to throw out something.
On your Candyland comment, I loved Candyland when I was a kid because I do have So obviously an effective DM tells you what you need to do.
Yeah, well, effective DM, one of the interesting aspects of that, kind of a small tangent, is you learn that you always want to say yes and kind of let the player try anything, right? To have that level of autonomy, give the player the autonomy. And that's the same thing when we go to have our users test our systems. We don't want to hold their hand. We don't want to guide them with our products. We want to back up and kind of observe how they interact with the environment that we've given them.
So do they ask like what you think, or do you ask them like what move they're gonna make?
Yeah, so a player would suggest, hey, I want to run down this stairs. I want to do a backflip and kick a guy in the face. And there would be a series. This would be what he would say probably. He's laughing because this is exactly what he would do. Yeah. And there would be a series of roles that he'd have to do. He'd have to succeed in order to be able to accomplish that. And maybe if the role is high enough, it's a little bit more set of flourishes that are involved, and it's descriptive. We'll get more into that too, because that's pretty cool.
One, it's complete failure. And if you roll a 20, it's fantastic success.
Yeah, so we call it, it's either a critical failure as a 1 or a critical success as a 20.
And the dice decides that?
The dice decides that, and see, that was a critical failure right there. He rolled a 1.
Yeah, but nat 20 is always going to be better than.
Correct. So no matter what your modifier is with a 1 or a 20, it doesn't really matter, right? That's why it's critical failures and critical successes. They don't take into account all the other maths that's involved. So the next stage would be the prologue stage, is what I'm calling it, and that's where we kind of start coming up with some of our artifacts. And in our game, yeah, we come up with some pretty high fidelity artifacts, but it can really be at the discretion of what your kind of group is trying to do, right? And maybe your own abilities. Some people focus on more of a story-driven game and session, while others love to have actual physical, tangible things that they hand out to their players. And this is the same thing in our design stage, right? We focus on these artifacts that we hand out to our stakeholders, even our users, if we want to do some small impression tests, and get them to start experiencing what could be, right? Those possible things that they could start interacting with. And then the last thing is, in UX, we call it the delivery phase, and this is the actual real session. This is the release of everything that the DM's been working towards, and a culmination of all the surveys, all the interviews, and all the product they've started to create, and then they actually interact with the players in the session. Yes?
In your campaign, have you guys been doing the same one for a certain amount of time?
Yeah, so we will definitely talk about that. So our campaign has been going on for almost a year. So we are doing a full-blown campaign, a long-term campaign. Yes, you could. Yes, most definitely. Most definitely.
No,
You mean arcs? You could create arcs to iterations? That you could, what was it again? You could
compare arcs with iteration. Arcs being the story arcs of the campaign.
Yep.
Usually we have some sort of bad dire
Yep.
But the way you experiment classifies as the
100%. And so those even could be like acts as well, right? Different kind of ebb and flows of the story where the story segments. Very cool comparison.
Too. Can evolve from the choices that the players make and the DM makes. The story can evolve just like in UX. If there's new features that need to be implemented, with new feedback being provided by the user base, we can update the process and include them.
Most definitely. So talking a little bit about the history of Dungeons & Dragons. So on the screen here, you see a few iterations of the first publication of D&D came out in 1974. And D&D was created by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson. And their first publication, again, was 1974. They created a company called TSR. The company name is Tactical Studies Rules, Inc. Thank God they call it TSR. It's a mouthful. And as time went on, the books were modified, expanded, and they changed over time. And since the first edition, there have been many, many revisions. Actually, over like 18 sub-variations. We're currently on the 5th edition, but there's been a lot of kind of branching off. In the 80s, they created what's called Advanced D&D, and it was kind of branching off a more rules light, which you can just look at standard D&D as kind of a rules light variant, and Advanced was creating more in-depth rules.
Was Dungeons & Dragons like the first game like this?
So prior to this, there was a lot of war games that were really big, but nothing that really tried to add in both combat and a story element in such a way that really kind of captured a nation. I'm sure that we can find, if we look deep enough, we'll probably find other supportive things that Gary and Dave actually kind of used to branch off of that. But I know that a lot of that came from war games that they used to kind of build off of this. That's why the first couple iterations of D&D were so focused on dungeon delving. There were very few aspects where, because the first world that they created was called Greyhawk. That was Gary Gygax's world that he made up. And it was very light on story and elements. It was much more heavy around dungeon delving. So in the 1980s is probably when the peak of D&D really took hold. And they kind of don't have there's a rough estimate between about 30 and 40 million players. And it slowly died down as video games kind of took some of the mainstream. We found more interactive mediums. But over the last 5 to 4 years, we've had a huge resurgence. There's been an estimated now additional 20 million players that are currently playing the game. And this has been for a couple reasons. One, TSR is no longer developing the game. Back in 1999, they handed off the IP to Wizards of the Coast, the guys that make Magic the Gathering, and which is another nerd game. And with that came some new iterations, 4th edition, and this recent one with 5th edition. And the big thing about 5th edition,
about history. In the 80s is when the satanic panic thing happened, right?
yes,
that's really
everyone remembers that.
Super weird and interesting about D&D, where they had the media just freak out and reinforce these stories that kids playing D&D were worshiping the devil, basically. Yeah, they tried to tie it into some cults and like actual satanic
and
stuff
also
happening.
teen suicide. So a lot of news used to try to tie in teen suicide to playing D&D. That kids were getting too deep into the minds of the characters that they portrayed.
There was like a couple really isolated incidents, I think, where that was actual like satanic worship.
Yeah.
And the media just exploded it into this.
Yeah.
Like everyone should be afraid, of this happening, but it was so blown. And D&D was part of
Oh,
that.
hell yeah. And so with the new 5th edition that came out in 2014, which is shown up here, some really interesting design changes that they made. They created what's called flat math. So a lot of D&D has a lot of math involved, and sometimes it can end up having a crap load of bookkeeping that can slow down your game. And the DM handles a lot of this stuff. But with 5th edition, they've kind of collapsed and compressed a lot of that. So it's a bit more accessible in a lot of different ways. Even though there's still a ton of rules, it's far more accessible in how you approach it. You don't even have to use all the rules in order to get a just general idea of how to play the game. And then one of the big things that happened about 2 years ago, because of Twitch TV, you guys all know what Twitch is? It's a streaming service. So a lot of people will stream video games or even like Magic tournaments and things like that on there. There was a TV show or a web show called Critical Role that, as a couple people kind of know about it, that really helped push D&D once again into kind of the mainstream. And Critical Role follows a series of overly nerdy voice actors that play D&D. And they do it so well, and the story arcs are so fantastic that it really got people engaged. Just last, I think it was February or January, they hit their peak of concurrent like users or people that are watching live the show, and it was around 65,000 people, 70,000 people. It's like if I right now was streaming to 65,000 people, 70,000
Yeah,
people.
they voice act.
Yeah, and they'll get into it. Matt Mercer. Mhm. Most definitely. And so those are kind of things that really pushed D&D into the mainstream. Oh yeah, and let's not forget about Stranger Things. If you guys haven't seen that movie or that show, the kids actually, because it takes place in the 80s, they were playing D&D and they were going against the Demigorgon, which is a monster type that's found in the game. Yeah. Exactly.
But before you switch over, so you can
Yeah.
see, just to tie this back a little bit, the evolution of the game between when it first came about to now with Wizards of the Coast picking it up. And one of the reasons why it's become a little bit more mainstream, the other games like Pathfinder and Shadowrun, things like that, and the fact that they flattened the math out is because they wanted to get a larger user base. So they evolved the game based off of feedback that they've been collecting over the years from 3.5, everyone hated 4, and they listened to the user base and adjusted the game based on that feedback. And now it's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's,
I can ask by flat math, do you mean the system that there's no, so the 3.5, I kind of remember as a kid, I stopped at
Yeah.
And 3.5, there's a lot of floating modifiers in that.
Yeah.
The situation to give you small bonus or small pressure. So you could be like, oh, I get +4 or something for flank, but I'm flat-footed, so I have to use a different armor. That's not the same. There's like a lot of stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you can look at things like resistance, right? So I'll give you a great example. Sometimes they had different monsters had a different numerical value for different resistance. It would hit slashing damage with a poison damage. And so you had to just do tons of math. Well, they decided, it's just half. Whatever the damage you did, if it's resistant to it, it cuts the damage in half.
And instead of
So now you don't have to have all these specific
Like
little,
Pokemon.
like Pokemon, very much so.
Or instead of like certain bonuses, like minor bonuses, they just switched it to you either roll twice and take higher number, or you roll twice and
Yep.
take lower. So it's
Right.
super easy to a lot of age groups, especially younger ones to older.
I agree.
Anyone could roll twice and be like, oh, it's smaller than 16. That's the roll.
Correct.
usability being a big thing in 5e.
Agreed. And so what we're going to show, can you turn on the,
It's right for you.
oh, did I turn it on? Okay. So to give you guys an example of, it's about 2 minutes and 20 seconds to give you an example of what a quick set of clips, I've kind of clipped some pieces together from a 35-minute video that features Vin Diesel. Yeah. Yeah. That's all she cared about.
Why do you think the gap is so wide? Like is that 1989?
Oh, I just threw up a different one. They actually continue to come out with revisions. It's been in 1974. Then there was a second edition that came out in maybe 83. But they go sometimes 5 to 6 years before they have a full revision. Because there are more books. They don't just release this one book. They release supporting books that expand on the content.
Oh, okay, yeah. I was like, that's a really long time.
Yeah.
for an idea.
So they call them source books, is what they kind of frame it as. The source books are about rules, and then we'll get more into the different types of things that they have. But basically, source books are all related to the rules of the game, and there's a lot, depending on what you want to throw into your game.
Well, that whole diary is coming out.
Yeah.
Like, literally this month.
Yep. Tomb of Annihilation.
And this iteration of 5C has a lot of those coming out. Actually, right now, I think they came out with one called like the 2 to 4.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be like almost a Jurassic Park.
Oh, that's Tomb of Annihilation. Yeah.
Before that, they came out with one. They actually brought all their old favorites and they made it for 5 years. And that's one of those called the 2 to 4. But I think it's called Tales of the Yawning Portal.
Yep.
Yeah. The Yawning Portal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they brought some of their favorites from all the past stories.
Right. And those stories are for a specific user base. Because I played the 2 4s at Desert Sky. They got it early, and it's not for me.
I want to try. I hear it's a killer.
You're supposed to go into the game with 5 pre-made characters. So when you die, you bring in the next one. That guy dies, you bring in the next one. So it's made for a specific user base. But yeah, it's fun for some people.
Yeah, I don't know. I never got to try it, but I know there are like different. There's a lot of different reactions to it.
Yeah.
Some will try to kill you. Some will try to kill you.
There we go. Hold on a second.
Some will play music.
The speaker's gone. So, yeah, we'll play this.
The user base and making decisions based off what who's sitting in front of them. So that's sort of a skill you have to learn, but that correlates back.
Is that DM's goal or is his goal to help them force or to like stop them from like facing the way? How specific are they?
It
Oh,
depends.
It depends on that. Okay.
It depends on how the DM wants to play and the expectations that were set up in sort of chapter 0, that discovery phase, to say, as the DM, my job is to kill you guys, right? Or my job is to set a stage and then let you do whatever it is you want. So those expectations are met early on, and everyone sort of agrees to the rules that will be put forth in the game.
They actually did another one very similar to this. With any Game of Thrones watch, SanMarco Charlie.
Yeah.
He was character.
Yeah, and that guy was more of a role player than Vin Diesel.
A little bit. But
Yeah.
So that's Vin Diesel the team.
No, Vin Diesel was a player. So the DM was the one that had that little screen behind him.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So what was Vin Diesel's role?
He was a player.
Yeah.
He was a player.
It's just really acting.
Okay.
Yeah. So a lot of times they role play, right? So you're playing, like you're acting like that character.
Right. So
So it's a strategy not to play? Is that what you're saying? Or to...
no, it's a difference in play style. So Vin Diesel's play style is to describe what he wants his character to do. Say, well, I would like my character to go to the front door and knock, as opposed to someone who is more role playing to say, "Well, I just hello."
Yeah. So
and sort of
one may
act that
pantomime
out.
it, while
Yeah.
the other one may actually describe it. So it's just a slightly different way of doing the same thing, right?
And it's up to the DM or the UX to sort of adjust based off of those.
Yep.
Yeah, you always get a variant of types of users or people that you're interviewing with or people that are participating. Yeah, you have to adjust to the way they are accepting your information or actually trying to pull information out of them. You need to adjust yourself in the way you talk, visually, audibly. You know,
You can compare it to different devices, different, whether it be through voice, through touch,
And how they're going to be interacting with it,
through
right?
chat, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Most definitely.
Even if you want to think about it in terms of interview, it's like I like to do mythic classes, and it's like if you want to.
Right.
Yeah.
There was never like I wouldn't do that or
So that's a huge aspect of what the DM's job is, right? Their job isn't, for the most part, to tell you no unless it's something ridiculous. It's more you can try that and see what happens, right?
That's actually what you just said, not to guide. Our interview processes should not be guiding a person down a certain
Correct.
track. We should literally be not talking much through that process, listening to them, making sure we understand that, not guiding them through a particular path. I think that's a miss. A lot of interviewing processes where you're almost inferring and assuming, and you overtalk over them, and then you actually push them in a different direction.
Even your face by doing this,
Yeah,
or
like,
by doing
I don't know why you do that.
yeah.
Then they're like, well, maybe I should be doing it.
And then they're going to try to give you what you think that you want to hear, and then you're not going to get true data, right?
With like design specs, they had some suggestions to ask open-ended questions, and don't really leave them.
Like, hey, go from the home screen to this specific spot where the deal is like, you got a bounty to kill with, and then however you want to do it.
Yeah.
So we'll definitely get to those pieces. Do you want to go over this part of chapter 0?
Yeah. So we're going to start getting a little bit deeper into sort of
The comparison and contrast between what you do on a D&D level, and then we're going to have on the right-hand side, you'll see what a similar UX task would be that kind of involves this kind of the same thought process.
Yeah. So I'll read some of the text here and then describe it. So chapter 0, like the discovery phase, is it helps define the scope of the game by giving the DM the who, what, why in regards to the expectations of the players. This activity also helps develop a relationship with the players by engaging in the character creation, allowing the DM to read the room. So basically, this sort of chapter 0 is getting everyone together to sort of agree on the expectations of the game, decide different facets of which we'll get into. So expectations are here. And the next one is allows the DM to sort of understand their players a little bit better.
So really how this kind of relates to is, right, it's our discovery phase. That is what we do. It allows us to, really discovery phase, right, helps define the scope of the project by giving the UXer the who, what, and why of the product and service that they're going to be creating for the user. And some of these activities that we do within this phase can be user interviews, right? We have surveys. We have all these different kind of tools in our toolbox. And contextual inquiries, journey mapping, heuristic evaluations, card sorting. These are all things that help us start to figure out, are we even, from the SAO, are we even going in the right direction? Is this even the best thing that we should be creating for this product? Or should we change and veer course right now rather than later on? And getting and collecting all this data is allowing us to decide where we're going to be heading.
So a little bit more about expectations. So setting expectations lets the players and the DM agree on the rules and interactions within the game space. And the primary information that's being determined during this phase would be time commitment, which is basically we'll go a little bit more in depth with time commitment, but it's how much time does the user base have for this game. Next one, the adventure type, right? So we're based off of the time commitment, we're going to gather information about what type of game are we playing here. And then the final one is the setting and the mood. So what style of game are we playing? Is it, just a few examples we'll get into more, is it a dark fantasy? Is it high fantasy? Are the players interested in magic? Are they interested in just combat or subtlety and things like that?
So what kind of UX activities? These could be a couple different ones, but we kind of go with, it could be surveys, right? And user interviews. And so user interviews focuses on us defining directly from our users around the kind of empathic, or showing that empathy, trying to understand the importance of what people are looking for from this product, or maybe what they've currently experienced with their legacy product they're currently in now. And by collecting this information, we're able to better position ourselves for with more validity to why we're going to be making what we're making in the kind of define and design phase. And so after we do all that, we start to come up, we start to formulate a UX hypothesis, right? And all these little tasks are helping us define that hypothesis.
Right. So the first one is a time commitment. So a frequency, session length, and campaign length. What this means is frequency. How often are we getting together? So Travis and Ted and my campaign, we meet about once a month. I used to go to Desert Sky every Monday to play, and that sort of is gone now. But I also run a game for my kids and my wife, and we do every 2 weeks. So what is the frequency in which we're playing? The session length is how much time do you have to offer? The game, is it 2 hours? Is it 12 hours? So all this information is gathered in sort of this user interview and sort of discovery phase. And then the campaign length. Is it going to be a quick game? Is it going to be a 6-month campaign, or is it going to be a 5-year campaign? So this is all information that needs to be gathered during this phase. And it gives the DM a sense of the scale of the game that they have to build. So if it's a 2-month campaign, it's not going to be as heavy on building assets and things. They might be able to pull things from different modules. But if it's a 5-year campaign, it's going to be something that's going to be stretched long term. They might be building overarching stories.
Yeah, and you kind of think about this too in the products that we build. Session length can be a huge difference, and even with the medium that they're using it in. So look at your Fitbit or your iWatch. So when I'm working with my Fitbit, I'm in that much more quickly. I'm in and out compared to when I'm on my phone and I'm on the Fitbit app. I'll usually maybe spend a few minutes looking at and comparing, contrasting graphs of the previous month, or I may be just looking at some more numerical values. Whereas on a Fitbit, when I actually have it on my hand, I'm just glancing and then I'm continuing to do whatever I'm doing, right? Whatever activity that I'm involved with. And those are little things that we have to think about when it comes to us creating our products, is the frequency and the kind of orientation of what they're going to be interacting with. Anyone have any questions? Thoughts? Okay, we'll move on.
It takes a long time. That's my comment.
It takes a long time.
It takes a long ass time sometimes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the adventure type. So the time commitment will lead us or give us information about what type of adventure are we doing. Are we doing a one-shot, which is that let's everyone get together one night and let's do one step.
A great example of this would be on Halloween night. A lot of times, D&D folks got some head bobs there. Okay. But they'll typically do a one-shot that is kind of more horror-centric. And one-shots are really good for horror because it's really difficult to kind of keep up the intensity through a series of campaign scenarios, right? And so one-shots are fantastic for horror experiences.
And then modules, which are predefined stories written by either a user base or Wizards of the Coast, like a Storm King Thunder or a Curse of Strahd. These are full-fledged stories with rule sets and sort of what to do's for your players already built in. So it's a module.
So think about that too. It's those are like libraries. So right, a module in UX could be pre-existing stuff. You're not building it from the ground up. It's already there, ready and accessible for you. And a lot of times during this phase, you can start to see, hey, this would be a great technology to leverage because it gets us 30 to 40% of the way there.
And then a homebrew campaign, which a lot of people opt in for, is a solely custom campaign. So what we do in our monthly campaign is a complete homebrew from scratch. But the good news with the homebrew is that you can pull things from one-shots and modules into your homebrews and integrate some or all of those adventures or items or monsters or whatever into the homebrew. This is a fully custom. This is up to the DM.
Yep. And that kind of, again, translates directly into kind of what we do in product services, right? Is this going to be a fully custom application that we're creating? Or is this something that needs to be leveraged? Are we leveraging Xamarin or something else in order to kind of build a few layers on top of it already, right?
So this is
It's a more flexible than Xamarin?
Well, let's hope so. Let's hope so.
Xamarin 3
Yeah, and a lot of
Xamarin native.
Yeah, native.
Well, 3.
And then the predetermination of these will set boundaries and rule sets. So if it's a one shot, people might take a little bit more risk because they're just doing that 1 4-hour session. If it's campaign, there's more rules around or the expectations and boundaries around it.
So how do you equate that to the users that we're still in discovery mode at this point?
Yes, we are. We're still all in discovery.
Is this adventure type is understanding their journey at this point?
Yes.
Is it a process?
Absolutely.
So this is all within what we call, I kind of call it chapter 0. So when we were initially all starting our campaign, I sat down with all 6 members that we're going to be playing this campaign with. And it was up to us and primarily the DM to kind of decipher what the players wanted out of it. And all these things you go through, it's like a series of questionnaires that you try to figure out what do they want. Because I don't want to spend a lot of time building something that they're never going to use, that they're irritated with after they get done. Like, oh man, he spent all this time, but I don't really care about this. Well, or why did he make it all about killing me? Why is he trying to kill me? And those things have to be an agreed upon or a set of expectations that you need to derive with almost like a verbal agreement between your players.
Yeah. And then, and with time commitment, you can even go to the next slide.
I'll go to the next slide.
Adventure type and setting and mood. All of this information, all of this data that we're collecting is ultimately going to form, which will be the delivery at the end, which we'll get to. But the product that the DM or the UXer is sort of trying to produce for the user specifically. So the players are the user base.
Yep.
And the product would be the game based off of a lot of this information that's being collected.
Yeah, and in the discovery phase, really, right, it's information gathering. Right, if I was going to draw what it looks like from the beginning of a product experience to an end, it's like I would just, it's a lot of noise, and then as we go along, right, we slowly start to fine-tune into a straight line. That's kind of the general idea of what we're doing. We're taking all this digital noise and trying to decipher it all. So currently in the Chapter 0 discovery phase, there's a lot of noise, and we're trying to filter down exactly what is going to be pertinent and what isn't pertinent in our campaign or in our game.
How much time?
A lot. So as a DM, every session, so think of this as a release, right? A sprint. Every sprint or every session takes me as a DM, again, it varies greatly, but for me about 8 to 10 hours. So it's an 8 to 10 hour prep that I have to do. You'll kind of see why. I go a little overboard with artifacts.
Okay. Yeah.
I've heard that it takes about much time to prep.
I've heard that it's double. So whatever, if it's a 3-hour session, so we got some head bobs there. So as a DM, I've noticed that the status quo is if your session is 3 to 4 hours, the DM did 6 to 8 hours worth of work in order to come up with that.
Yeah, that's actually important, really important for a user experience person going into a project where you're fighting a lot of people saying, why is it taking so long? Why is this process, I don't even see your screen. I don't even understand where you're at. You haven't even done one wireframe yet. And that just goes to prove that, the process can be iterative, a little bit cut short, but your discovery period is going to be over 70% of the overall why work that you do. Creating UI and patterns and things like that, I don't want to make it trivial, but there's a lot of things out there to be able to copy and understand and do. I personally don't put a lot of hours into that activity, where putting hours into the why will give us better and faster output in the 20% and 30%. So just
I think that's a really interesting thing too, because that I could talk about, that's a different DM. So you also, each one of us focuses, maybe you focus 70% on discovery, I focus 55%. Every UXer is going to have a slightly different variance in.
It depends on how much you need.
And it's going to depend on the product and the user, right?
Yeah.
So this is the same thing that a DM goes through. Some DMs are like, I really love story, or I really like combat. And they try to make combat more exciting for their players. And those are all different variances that a DM has to kind of go through with different agreements, whether it's verbal or nonverbal, with their players.
Yeah, and it depends on the user base too, because the campaign that I'm DMing for my wife and kids, it doesn't take as long to prep because my kids are 10 and 14 and they don't care. They just want a cool story and a lot of action. So it's easier to produce content for them as opposed to, myself and Ted and now 6 other people. We're adults and we expect the best. So,
Jeez. Okay.
Well,
Okay.
I mean, I think that's in your clients too.
Yes.
You're doing stuff for certain clients that are
Customer
paying you
facing.
a lot of money to do something for them, and they want quality.
Yep.
Quality takes time.
It does.
Like, I'm not saying you have to spend all your time all at once up front, waterfall up into 80%. But it takes time for some quality to come through. And if you're slapping it against the wall, that's not quality. That's slapping it against the wall.
Yep.
And I think for certain clients, maybe that's all it takes. Maybe they were providing you enough that you can get it through.
So a lot of this could be, right, when you look at customer facing compared to something that's going to be delivered to their internal business. A lot of times internal business cares way more about, does it get to the end point? Is it rich in functionality? I don't always need it to be the prettiest thing I've ever seen in my life. I need it to be rich in functionality and give me that data. And I don't care if that data is a little weird and awkward as long as it's there and ever present. Compared to something that's customer facing, they're trying to sell people. If it's my business, I already got them sold. They're locked in because I pay them a salary. They're going to try to figure it out regardless. So these
Until
are
they quit.
until they quit.
And
And
then you have a whole other
well,
training.
yeah, and there's a whole nother argument with why I consider
But
customer
it
facing
also
stuff.
relates to the maturity of the client.
Exactly.
I
It's
agree.
not only just how much they're paying you. What's their maturity? Will they understand like that? The detailed 70% that you do, will they take that as valuable?
And do they look at their business as the same way they look at their customers?
Yeah.
And that's been a hard thing. They're trying to get that kind of merger of those ideas with a lot of our clientele. Sometimes they think, well, I got to spend all this money to go and grab clients. Well, a lot of times when it comes to, let's say, think about customer service, right? Verizon. I have friends that actually work at call centers, and some of those call centers, they don't give you enough information about how to properly handle one of these calls. And some of it is just the UI that they have in front of them is difficult to work with. They're fighting the UI while they're trying to empathize with their customer. Instead, Verizon should be focusing on how to make that UI more seamless, easier for them to figure out, so they can spend more of their empathetic time on the customer. And sometimes a non-mature client doesn't realize that it translates. They should be looking at it more as a one-to-one, right?
How many do your own heuristics after heuristic valuation after you've done iteration of an idea or a UI? So I think those 10 rules would help a user get through. I mean, heuristics in itself, the meaning of it is allowing a person to be able to do a task and learn it on his own, not learn it with instruction and
with a month of training, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to diminish, is how much of that training
most
they have
of the
to
times
absorb.
when we go into a project, we are trying to reduce a lot of different overhead of training and certain onboarding, certain things like that cost money that people don't actually know they're paying for. And if you're able to, sometimes the time on task part isn't the thing that saves the money. It's the things that the comprehension and the retention of the task itself is actually more valuable than the time it takes to do the task.
I usually call that the burden of knowledge. So it's they have to acquire the acquisition of how to interact with the existing product, right? That can take a ton of time for new users. And if you can have it where it's more intuitive, we're still maybe having to learn things, but it's more intuitive, or it's more interesting, more fun, the feedback is more natural, they're going to naturally kind of attach themselves to those UI elements. So
this one. So it's basically, this is the final piece, like setting a mood. This is dark fantasy, light fantasy. It's setting an expectation by the user base, which is the players, to the DM, which is the UX.
So I look at this like, right, the tone. So when you look at like swashbuckling, that's kind of like Pirates of the Caribbean, right? When we look at low fantasy, minus this season of Game of Thrones, it's been primarily pretty low fantasy. High fantasies like Lord of the Rings. Something that's a dark fantasy, I don't know if anyone's seen like Pan's Labyrinth. That's kind of a dark fantasy, which typically deals with less of the supernatural and more of the human macabre and the things that really are scary that humans actually do. Whereas horror, a lot of times, just kind of get the quick fears, not the psychological fears. And knowing all these things, right? Knowing all this stuff as a dungeon master is all just about you getting your nice collection of reference points so you can start building a bag of tricks to be able to hand out to your player base. And that brings us to the next section, which is we're still in the discovery phase. We're still in like chapter 0, which is know your players.
Yeah. So when you're interviewing your players, when you're having this chapter 0 and talking with them, setting expectations, it's really important to keep a keen eye and ear open to sort of understand what player type they are, right? So as the DM, you need to understand the players within the group to determine how to set the game up and then meet all those expectations. So if you're gathering information about your user base and you're not listening to the type of user they are or the type of player they are, and you build something that's not meant for them, then they're ultimately not going to use it.
It's abandonment, right? Yeah.
What are you trying to listen to from the D&D space, right? So you're the DM. So what are you hearing them specifically tell you what
Yep.
Yes and no. So there's two. So we'll get into that. Those are good, solid questions.
Yep.
So the two pieces, right? A character type is actually we'll describe it. There's a character type, and then there is player type. And so these kind of translate to personas, right? We a lot of times either create personas because of information that we've collected, or sometimes we make general estimates. We guess our best guesstimation on what the type of people that are going to be interacting with our product.
I
And
think some people use archetypes.
archetypes.
Persona breakdowns, so that kind of equates to that particular frame of reference.
Most definitely.
Absolutely, yeah. So the first is character type. So this has to do with the game itself. So class, which is like a fighter or a healer. There are in D&D there's different races like there's like half orcs and humans and all sorts of different races that interact with the world. Personalities and backgrounds. Basically, the players, who are they going to become when they're playing these characters? And this all equates to the type of world you're building, and you're sort of structuring it based off of the character types.
So these are kind of like, think of quantitative.
Yeah.
So the reason why this is a quantitative understanding is because these are rules. These are directly based off of the player handbook's set of rules. Sure, there's some level with the personalities and backgrounds that a player has some leeway with and how they interpret it, but a lot of these are directly based off of rules. So to give you guys a general example, we call it in video gaming, what is it, the Holy Trinity is what we call it in video games, which is a healer, usually like a tank, and a damage dealer. So a tank is just someone that kind of just sits there and can take a lot of damage. And so these three pieces, if all you have on your team, right, everyone can choose what they want to do. Let's say all you got is a bunch of healers. Well, that's going to change the type of game that you create as well, right? Because you know on a quantitative level that this is exactly what you're going to have to deal with. So you have to kind of tweak the game, the experience, the type of monsters they fight, maybe who they talk to, because of their party makeup. So we call a party a group of PCs, or a group of player characters, which usually consists of 2 to, holy crap, up to like 10 or 12. I've seen some crazy dungeon masters that decide to have that many players. It's way too many. But that's what we kind of include as in a party, is a set number of people that are there in that session that are playing your game.
What do you quantify? Like, what's the count?
The count, okay, so a race has a certain amount of strength, has a certain amount of HP, has a certain amount of damage. It's very, no player.
Quantitative numbers around
Correct.
strength.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it's very specific.
Same
There
with
isn't
class.
same with classes.
There's a lot of data quantitative data in relation to what they
How
can
can
do.
you-
Because it's mechanical related.
Where does that equate to personas on that?
I think it's like building the surveys, like where they fall, scales, cost tabbing, grades, and where they fall.
So it could be a way to quantitative is if, let's say you're a mom and you have 1 hour or 1 minute a day or 3 minutes a day or whatever that actual quantitative metric is to buy a product. These are quantitative things that we can say, okay, my persona, my mom, is going to Amazon and she just needs those damn diapers. All right, she doesn't want to discover anything. She just wants those damn diapers. She wants to hit a button. Notice how they kind of Amazon created those little quick order buttons. So sometimes we don't want to have to fiddle around with it. I just want to, Amazon dealt with it. I don't want to have to touch it. So those are things that are quantitative that are part of the personas. And I would say when we look at our player types, these are a little bit more qualitative things. They're still based heavily in psychology.
Yeah.
I'll let you kind of carry this one a little.
Yes.
Or do you want me to take this one?
Go for it, man.
All right, this one's a little heavy. So the player base or the player types, Don't cry. So this is looking at what we all get out of our games. Right? Some of us like to be explorers. We don't really like to fight people. Some of us like to see the epic stories unfold. Others, kind of like this guy here, he hates this, but we always call him the murder hobo. He just wants to kill stuff. And other people are other people are in it to just observe, or we call them, those are more of our casual types of players. And Robin D. Laws kind of coined a lot of these player types back in the 80s. But they've continued to kind of permeate in game design as a whole. We're always refining down these personality models. And a few other examples would be the 4 Bartle types. So kind of like if you've ever gone on Google search and looked at like where you lie in politics, right? It kind of looks like an XY set of coordinates, and there is a series of things in there. So on the X coordinate, you're looking at a world on the top level and players on the bottom. And on an X coordinate, you're looking at acting and interacting. And some players want to act, and they want to act with players. You're most likely a killer if you have a lot of acting, not interacting, but acting on. You're most likely hurting or trying to do. You want to do as much damage as possible. If you want to interact with players, a lot of times you are a socializer. You want to explore more conversations and learn more about the lore of the world or why people exist. And why these things are really important in UX is these are driving factors. They put so much time and money in the way that video games build what they create, right? Why they create things for us. And I think we really should pay more attention to all the psychological research that game developers do and game designers do on the types of personalities that interact with their multi-million-dollar games. And I think it's an area where a lot of UXers, I know I've done this sometimes, we make over really big assumptions sometimes with their personas. We may not have enough information, so we try to use our best guess ideas on, and we more infer our own ideas and put our own impressions into those personas. And I think that having more psychological backing and maybe even just more data, that we can kind of drive how the habits of our users are. And that's really on a D&D level what we're looking at with our player types. And so I'm kind of going to look at some of our quick, the butt kicker. We got that guy right there. Okay. So we call him the murder hobo. So this is someone who wants to let off a lot of steam when they play the game with a little old-fashioned vicarious mayhem. He picks a simple combat-ready character, whether or not that is the best route to power and success in the system, in whatever given system that we build. And how this relates to UX, this user has no time to waste and wants to use their product or software immediately with little to no effort. They want to load it up and just go with no headaches or stoppage. Users like these are often the hardest to manage their expectations, right? So, are you laughing over there?
I'm laughing because hardest to manage expectations. They're hard to manage.
Correct. And you can learn a lot from that. It's kind of funny, when I started the whole D&D stuff, I just thought it was going to be something fun, because it is a lot of fun. But now I've realized why I like being the DM so much. Because in UX, that That is kind of what we tend to be, and it's fun to see and interpret and kind of come up with hypothesis around how can I best serve this user? How can I best serve this player? And then we have the power gamer, or we call them the min-maxer. The min-maxer just means for the minimum amount of effort, they can get the maximum amount of output or impact. So yeah, that's you. Yeah. So this person wants to make his or her character bigger, tougher, buffer, richer. However, success is defined by the rules of the system you're using, and the player wants more of it. He or she tends to see their PC as an abstraction, as a collection of superpowers optimized for the acquisition of still more superpowers, right? Just more is better. That's all. And the way, I won't read the whole block here, but this is a power user. This is the guy that wants his Excel spreadsheet and exactly all these orientations. He wants to have a fully blown custom view. This is your old ass MySpace guy that had the GIFs and he wanted to be able to play the music right when you go on his page so you can listen to how horrible his Nickelback is, right? No matter what it was. It's that kind of person. That power gamer or that power user that wants 100% control over the environment of which you've given them. The tactician. So this is the rules lawyer. This is the person that will question your every move as it pertains to the actual quantitative metrics of the game. So if you call something in the game and he knows or she knows it's wrong, she is going to yell at you for the full extent and say, well, we need that needs to change because the rule says this, and they're the first ones to open up the rule book and tell you exactly how it is. So a lot of times how this actually plays out on a UX space is this person can be actually your best asset at times. I actually leverage rule lawyers a lot because I can be inexperienced in certain areas of the D&D rule set. Just like if we come up with a rules lawyer in our day-to-day lives as a UXer, they want to be involved in the ideation. Yeah, they may be a little bit over-controlling, but on average, they're going to be one of your best advocates. They will help promote your product to their peers as well as their superiors. So knowing those types of things with those types of people are going to...
the worst ones to sell.
Yeah.
To actually get them on your side.
Most definitely.
So the first ones to go, you can't do that. And you got to spend a lot of time on warming them up.
Yes.
To be an advocate. It's not like they're on that.
So the casual gamer, without going into this gigantic block of text, the casual gamer is the person that's there. A lot of times they're an observer. They love to just be a part of whatever it is. They just want to be there. It's like your friend that maybe not like the movie that you're watching, but he wants to be there to hear everyone laugh and be there to support. Yeah, that kind of thing, right? Just be a part of whatever cool thing is going on. And so on a UX level, the casual user of a product or service, they don't have a lot of input. They pretty much just are there for your analytics. They're just helping spoon feed more of your analytics. They'll just do it regardless. You could even mess up a little bit and they're just so casual about it, they really don't care.
It's their job to be sitting next
yes.
to you.
So
that's what they're doing.
I had to show this, by the way. I don't want to talk too much about this. This is actually our players. So I commissioned an artwork with a guy that was out in Poland. And for 2 months, about 8 weeks, 8 weeks, I worked with this guy. He was amazing. This guy, Jacob, was amazing. And him and I kind of ideated. We went from concept to finished product over the course of 8 weeks. And so Jason, that's Jason's character. Ted's character.
You're a girl?
That's right. No, he's androgynous, most definitely. But that was actually something that he wanted to be. It was androgynous. So yeah.
I'm a bard, so I trick people. That's fine.
You didn't explain the rest.
So these are just other people. So the Jason's wife.
That's my wife here.
And then my wife's over there in the far right-hand corner. And this actually is a hidden character. It is a gnome wizard who is an illusionist that can turn himself into a rock. So there is some gnomish script that spells out his actual name, his character name. So I had to do it.
Yeah.
I had to do it.
And
It
based
was,
off of- oh, this is a friend of ours, TJ. He's a human paladin. But, more importantly, based off of these, we do have some of those archetypes in here. So, of course, Ted's the murder hobo. He doesn't want to admit it, but it's true.
Dwarf monk.
Yeah, dwarf monk. Yep, right here. I would say that I'm probably more min-maxer, storyteller. I always want, or achiever. I want to get things going and move the story along. TJ's a role player. Sometimes he gets really into it. I've seen him cry. Actually cry.
I've seen him yell and scream. And this guy is a very burly man. He's a very
he gets really into it. It's great. Fantastic.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
He freaks everybody out.
Yeah.
He slams the table. He screams and wakes everyone up in the house. Yeah. And then my wife is probably the most casual of the casuals. She enjoys just being around everybody and enjoys being a part of the event.
She writes down everything.
Yeah, she's our scribe. Most definitely our scribe.
You can also be that you're not just a murder hobo. A murder hobo might also want to be a min-maxer.
Yeah, the best murder hobo he can possibly be.
Right.
Yeah, murder.
Or a rule player can also be a really good min-maxer. He knows a lot of what
Definitely could be.
Yeah. There is definitely a blend of different archetypes. Same with user base.
Yeah.
So, you take the story. I'll take the
Yeah, I can take the story. Okay. So the story really, it brings the focus and scope to the game. It constantly drives the players forward using 5 basic elements that we kind of know from just books and storytelling, right? Character, setting, plot, conflict, and resolution. And some of the things that we do, the activities, actually the biggest activity is world creation. And the piece of this is, the piece of this is our define phase, right? The story aspect that we're creating is our actual part of the 4D phase is going to be the define. You want to talk a little bit about that?
So it takes all of the data that we've been collecting in user interviews and surveys and setting expectations to define everything within the product, right? So we're using gap analysis, we're building backlogs and setting requirements, we're putting together site maps or app maps to sort of create this journey or the process flow of all the data that we've been collecting within the discovery phase of this service.
Huh?
It's okay.
Okay, it's okay.
Anybody do app maps? Does anybody do app maps where they work? Or, process flows, but using it more in a screen-based type. Yeah, a lot of people, I find that a lot of people don't do that. They rely more on normal process flows, but I find that small mini app maps,
like little mini wires
help other users and other developers understand what that pattern means, because then you can sit back at a higher level and go, oh, there's like 3 or 4 things that I think is the same. 3 or 4 things I think are here the same. So really our effort gets smaller because I know that 5 of these are the same here and 5 of these are the same here. And really only doing 2 things.
It helps to find our patterns, right? Where you can start to see the through line, right? Oh, that's really similar to this. That's really similar to this. And if you have kind of the bird's eye view, and that's the same thing in D&D. What we don't want to do at this phase, right, is we don't want to get so deep into the weeds, into the minutia, that we're already building out the session right now. We don't want to do that. We don't want to build out every single character, every single NPC across the land. You're going to build stuff that maybe players will never get to, right? So you want to be focused. It's kind of like looking at an MVP, right? We want to be focused on what we're building and why we're building. We want to be focused on our first session or our first release. You do not want to build, when you create a location like, oh, I'm going to create Winterfell. If you're never going to Winterfell in the next season or session, why define every single person that's in Winterfell and why they exist there? Why not just say Winterfell? And we're going to be in King's Landing. And let's talk more about, because our first session will be there. Our MVP is going to be in King's Landing. Let's work on really building out those sets of interactions there. So in the world creation process, right, it's our backdrop that deepens the DM and even the players' general understanding of the big picture. It defines the who, what, where, and when, and why of people, place, and things, our general nouns, right? The content is constantly being revised and expanded as the adventure unfolds. So this is one of the areas where it is part of the define phase, but I could argue that there is some design that kind of goes into here as well, because there is that infinite loop of feedback, then it goes back into our experimentation, and then we have output, right? But it really felt like a lot of this was so broad that it kind of belonged into our define phase, where we're really getting those broad strokes. And so we're looking at our overall nouns, right? People, history, locations, and these are all going to be our primary. There's more than this, but I just kind of wanted, yeah, definitely. And these are kind of the main things I kind of want to hit on. And I really feel that a part of this UX activities is defining the backlog, right? Starting to get down to what are all those epics and themes, maybe even user stories if we can start to get there. And now we're starting to see a foundation kind of unfold underneath us, right? Where we're really starting to get down to the nitty gritty. Oh my goodness, look who it is. What's up, buddy? So with that in mind, I will jump into people. So people, heroes, villains, and NPCs, right? These are the kind of key players that our PCs or our player characters are going to be interacting with. They drive the story forward and gives the players purpose to what they're doing. And then we have, of course, history, that folklore, the intrigue, deities, and politics. A lot of this is going to revolve around the history, kind of enriches the story based on events that have taken place way back before in history, and adds to more of the why behind our story elements. And I think the biggest piece of what I like about history is it truly does solidify why the players can have a suspension of disbelief, right? If you don't have a true reason for why a king is mad at somebody, they're not going to seem real. They're not going to seem like they actually belong in that world. And that's the reason why when we create the types of features, we want to have a true purpose. We don't just want to go, well, it's an industry standard to have a contact form. It just should be there. Well, we want to make sure that the features that we're building are supposed to be there, that they're built with the user in mind, because the user is going to be interacting with that on a regular basis. Huh? I'm trying to. Yeah, I don't know if I can project it.
Also, the history can tie back into like the current state of any product that you're building, right? So
yeah.
you've got an existing piece of software, an existing product that and an existing user base, and so you have to take all that into account when you're building, whatever product or service that you're tasked to do. Is what is the history of what I'm working on? What are people used to seeing? Can we innovate? Can we use some of this stuff and moving forward in the product?
I think a good example is whenever you're going into, like you said, an existing product, right? You're not going to create a whole new story, a whole new history over here to add one little feature.
Correct.
And so just understanding the history, understanding what's a pattern, what's the current pattern that exists, what is this built on, and what are my limitations?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with that too, it could be if it's a product that we're pioneering, there's not going to be a lot of reference points that we can use, like when it comes to mobile applications, right? There's a lot of standards that we can kind of extrapolate and use in our systems. So this kind of goes back to D&D. Are we using a pre-existing world, like are we using Star Wars or Game of Thrones, and building off of that, maybe making those experiences a little unique, kind of twisting them a little bit? Or are we making our own complete from the ground up campaign? And kind of like what we do, we have our worlds called Nezergard. So that's kind of like we built this thing from the ground up. But it doesn't mean when you build something from the ground up that you only make things that are unique. Because in truth, you're never going to make anything completely unique, right? We always base it off of some other thing that exists, and you mix and match those things that best suit your users or your players.
Yeah, you still define things using other industries that you maybe this industry is new to you. Maybe what you're doing is bringing other industries over to this other industry processes over to this industry, and finding, and understanding their current state over here closely represents something that I'm trying to achieve over here, and I'm going to take that experience from here. So that's one thing that's nice about user experience people, especially if they have cross-pollinated themselves through different. That's a gross term.
You're just reading it.
I wanted to say it. Waiting all night to say
I now think it's gross. I'll never use that term again.
Lost the train of thought. The one thing that's nice about our little group here is that we have seen a lot of different things. We're concentrating on process, we're concentrating on people. I think what happens is that we often get it pretty good right. I'm not saying everything that we know everything, but there are certain things that we can bring to the table that possibly other groups of the development team can't bring because they're so hyper-focused on that scenario, like that thing over and over and over and over, where we bring that perspective of the outside world into the development. And I find that even at the 80% of what we're trying to discover, we often get it right by having a particular role like ours embedded into that team. When I see no role of user experience empathy involved in the process of development, I find it lacks even more.
Yes.
Even if we didn't have the time to do all the discovery in the world, we're still taking our own experiences and applying those experiences to the new thing. So I'm not saying we have to go crazy on discovery, but definitely understand the definition is what our guiding development is.
Correct.
These are MVP. This is where I want to start with. This is how I want to build it. This is the roadmap of how to build software. I think should be controlled by the user experience people, not by the developer.
Most definitely. So one of the other pieces of world building, right, is locations. These are our towns, our dungeons, our cities, maybe a religious temple, or like kind of the plains, so like heaven or hell or limbo. And these locations drive events that will take place. They give personality to kind of lifeless environments. It makes it more lifelike, more human-like or lived in, and provides obstacles or aid to the players in events that from the events that are taking place. So that brings us to the design stage, which is what I kind of call the prologue. So this is where we're really starting to look at creating artifacts, right? Preparing for the session, if you will. So we're creating an engaging, fun, and challenging set of obstacles and even story elements for our players. The prep is kind of what we usually call it, can be repeated and refined until the campaign comes to its conclusion. So this is where in UX, we tend to have the kind of release. We release something, we get some feedback, we maybe do some user testing and validation, and with that feedback, we go right back to the design process most of the time. Sometimes we have to go back to our define phase, but a lot of times we will go back to the design phase to iterate through whatever feedback comes from our users. And some of the things that we look at are encounters and visual aids or assets. And then we have, of course, our design. You want to talk a little bit about the design phase?
Sure. So it cements the hypothesis, and it says here, generate some more true-to-life mock-ups. So, some of these things that you could build, obviously prototypes, wireframes, visual assets, or tangible assets that can be shown to the user base or to the client so that they can get a better representation of all the information that has been gathered through discovery in the define phase, now in a tangible and sort of malleable product. So wireframes, visual designs, micro interactions. There you go.
So on the DM level, this is kind of your big bread and butter, right? This is what everything has kind of started to kind of feed into, which is our encounters. Our encounters are kind of described as any short scene of interactions that the players are actively participating in. These encounters can be as simple as like, you have a locked door, and how do you get through that, right? Or it can be as complex as you're fighting a big baddie while the cave is collapsing. What do? You have a lot of different options there. And maybe there is an escape route all the way at the top of this cave. Well, they have to figure out, do they go that way? Do they go this way? What do they do? There's a series of different directions that they can take. Yeah.
Their success or failure is determined on the dice, right?
Yes and no. So the action that they're requesting to do that causes a roll will be determined by the dice. But if they were to say, like, I'm going to run down this tunnel, and within the encounter, that tunnel is designed to be a dead end, and there's no roll that can keep them from escaping that dead end, because they chose that. So, yeah.
I would say also depending on what they want to do, how hard or how high they have to roll.
Yeah, we call that a DC rating, which is it's kind of like a difficulty class. And that is, a lot of times the DM will have that in their head. They keep it invisible to the players. And so depending on what you roll, it's like, hey, you need to match or exceed this number, and I'll give you a success. If you don't match that, you can maybe grade it. So if they just barely didn't make it, you would have a really good way of describing it. As you tried to jump across that ledge, you see salvation in front of you. And as you reach out to grab onto the cliff, your hand slips. You can feel the gravel loosen in your hand. So as the DM would describe those things because of the number you got. He had it in his head or her head that it was a 12. You got an 11. So you just barely missed it. Or you get a 2. And so I can say, as you run and you jump, you trip over your feet and you fall to you fall 35 feet. You're now unconscious, right? Like, it completely changes the interactive story due to some of those dice rolls. And it allows for some fun randomness and gives the DM some.
How does that compare to UX where you're betting against your user? Let's talk about that.
So it's not really you're betting against your user in a way. It's more along the lines of when a user interacts. It could be, we don't position that exactly that way. We can say, this is something that I built, right? It could be just a homepage. And maybe I didn't make the button as colorful enough. Maybe I didn't make it interactive enough, or I didn't fade it in. And so now they're lost, and they're clicking aimlessly to try to figure out where that call to action is, or how to get to their.
Maybe if you were to take that dead end example.
Yeah.
To make it less of
it's like a 404 page.
Less of a scolding.
Yeah.
Rather than say, like, kind of soft and flow and say, hey, you didn't do the right thing, but I'm gonna guide you this way.
Yeah, because that happens a lot in 404 pages that I see, where most pages just stop you. They don't give you anything else. They don't help guide you. Hey, come back to check this out. Seems like you messed up on something. We have this, this, and this, and give the user or the player some suggestions on where they can go, right? And so with kind of going back to the encounters really consists of combat and monsters, rewards, traps and puzzles, and commerce and politics, right? And when we look at these are kind of the features of our application. These are those main, primary, big selling features. Do we have things as like search? What type of search is it? Is it predictive? Do we have a way for, with kind of the learning of maybe of their behavior, we can spit them out some suggestive products, right, that Amazon kind of has. So these are our primary features that are defining points of our product or of our website. And to kind of give you, these are some of the assets that I've created. So visual aids and assets. As a DM, the DM takes all the previous collected information and begins crafting a tangible representation of that world. And those artifacts such as hand-drawn dungeons, items, maybe even a music playlist to kind of get people in the mood, sound effects, and painted regional maps like I have here. They all help cement both the DM and the players in the world. And how does this really relate to UX? Maps serve as both a blueprint and a conversation starter. And much like wireframes and even like visual design, right? How we can have low and high fidelity. I'm kind of showing two examples here. One, I just sketched in my my Moleskin the general dungeon here. So this would be the stairway, and then it goes into this kind of almost like a precipice that has like a sacrificial thing that they kind of go through as they walk. It's like a top-down view, right? You have pillars, and then they got more things that go into. Then they go back down to a staircase, and that staircase leads them into this kind of opening here. So it's a little map that they can explore and interact with. And I build a series of traps and puzzles and interactions. And the big map there is the actual a piece of the world that they're currently exploring. We figured out where they wanted to, where they're going to start in, and then I could craft some new encounters for that particular area because it was themed.
Yeah, and just to stay on that for a second,
Yeah.
you know, with Travis building this, I mean, this is, I think, only 60% of what the whole map looks like.
It's a giant map.
It's huge. Our campaign started here, and what Travis did was create a scenario or a set of scenarios just here because that's where we're hyper focusing on. So just to go back to the, you know, some of the previous discussions, is that he's not building this entire world here, as we're not, as UXers, we're not building the entire piece of software application or product right off the bat. We're hyper focusing and we're sort of getting that MVP and then expanding as we're learning more about the product.
Yeah, so it's kind of like when we have an MVP, a lot of times we may find out that we're going to need to know that we're going to expand maybe this one section of categories of products. But we don't want to build in hard-coded stuff that makes it way harder to add new products and new searchable products, right? So we need to know, well, what is the general foundation for us to say, hey, we know that sooner or later we're going to be adding in new products we need to build for the future in this particular feature. And that's kind of what a map is there for. It's saying, hey, we got these kind of key points, these points of interest. We're not going to define exactly what that is, but we put into place a framework so we can build into that, maybe even reference it later on. And that happens a lot in code where we reference other aspects as we build on top of that stuff.
Yeah, and to give just a little bit of perspective too, is that, you know, we've got this entire world built, and we started here, and a year ago we started here, and we are now right here 12 months later. So
we've gone almost nowhere.
Yeah, but we've done a lot, right? So we don't need to have the whole thing built out. Where, you know, if the user base is sort of happy or not happy with just being in, you know, sort of a set of features, then it doesn't have to be sort of rushed to get features.
So in D&D, like, are you always in the same location? Or
No, we're all over the place.
You could branch out.
It all depends on what the players do and how they decide. They could burn the entire town down. I don't know. They could decide to
So my question is,
ally with the main villain of the game. I have no idea what
all the players interact in the same location.
Yes. So there's a big phrase in the D&D community. Never split the party is what you'll hear people scream all the time. It's because now you're in multiple areas and a bunch of random crap's going on, and it's really hard to keep track of all those pieces. So for the most part, the party is one solid unit for the most part. All right. So I just kind of wanted to show some fun other assets. These are items that I ended up creating for our players. They're in the form of magic cards. So so I make these items, and I hand them out when they finally find these kind of big items. So they feel really rewarded. And I always pay attention to how they accept these items and then see how they interact with the game later on. How do they use these items? Are this more supportive items, or do they hate them, do not use them at all? And I'll know next time when I go to design new items I'll have an idea of what I did wrong and what I did well, right? That iterative process.
And these are crafted for the players specifically, right? So this is an item that my wife just acquired not too long ago, and it's based off of feedback that she gave Travis about her character and how she felt about the game. So what the DM is doing and what the UXer is doing is crafting the features, which in this case are these assets, crafting the features for the user base to enhance that experience.
So that brings us to the final piece, the session, right? The session begins with the DM setting up the imagery and the scene and letting the players start to interact with the world that we've spent so much time building. This is like a momentous occasion, right? And it's really stressful. Think about when you're finally finished with, it could be a small sprint where you're releasing a small set of features, or finally the product, right? This can be exciting and really, really stressful to see how the users finally interact with what you spent all this time building. And it's a true testament to what you build. And so the DM typically gives full autonomy to the players, but follows a rough an outline of events, right? So the DM lets the players choose how those events unfold and improvising when necessary. So there is a lot of improv that goes on as being a DM, because like we all know in UX, we have no idea what our players are going to do. We have no idea what our users are going to do. We could create this awesome product and then realize that right at the get-go, you have them do like logging into Facebook and you realize that none of your users actually have Facebook. Like that would just suck right then and there, right?
I think that's why players enjoy a lot, because you are creating the story as you go. Like you were saying, you kind of create the blueprint for which the story to occur on, and then the players can do with it what they will.
Yeah.
Whether that is torture to the ground or follow your loose path that you've laid out.
So a lot of this we could even parallel this to Facebook as a product, right? Facebook gives you the ability to have a voice, or Twitter gives you the ability to have a voice, and a voice to speak out things that you shouldn't say to your coworkers and you shouldn't put on Facebook, or you can share cat memes. You know, who knows? Thanks, Grandma. So things like that, right? And it gives you some ability, some agency that the user has within your UI.
I think also not building this in a silo, right? So you're not building this
Never.
world in this experience in a silo. You're involving your users. So if there are some faults, they're going to help you kind of bridge those gaps.
Exactly. And that's kind of what will come with the session. So when we look at the session, we have playing the actual game, right? Sometimes we'll introduce brand new mechanics, right? These could be new features of our software program. And then we finally get that quintessential feedback of how well did we do.
So, I was going to say, based on what you said, I didn't know if you were going to get to it, but huge things that will change a lot in any campaign is how much your characters are engaged in the story, right? Like a really touching sensory detail narrative about how this NPC dies. They didn't care about it. That was a whole monologue for nothing. Or sign a whole convertible. Or you can spend all this time. They don't care about the product or anything. You know, they may do it, but if they care about it, they'll probably give you a lot more feedback and a lot more thoughts. Like, well, it's all right, but I would have liked that there compared to.
And I think that's also key for a DM and key for us as UXers to always make sure that we keep our door open. And not only do we keep our door open, let's let our users know that the door is open, right? You may be, oh yeah, I'm cool with feedback. But if you don't really project that out there and let your users know to give you that feedback, you don't send out maybe the emails, maybe SurveyMonkey or whatever we want to do. Like a lot of times on my projects, we actually specifically set up time every sprint to meet with our users. And it may be only an hour, maybe 2 hours, but that gives them an opportunity, a moment in time to really let you know how that last release went. So that kind of parallels, as I just said, to the delivery process, and which is a series of testable and actionable elements. And they all kind of interconnect to begin building what will either be the system or it will add to an existing system. And these are kind of like prototypes. The usability test and validation and QA are some of the tasks that we do within the delivery process. And I'm going to kind of go a little quick here, but so playing the game, right? We look at, as a DM, while you're playing the game, you kind of look at a lot of verbal and nonverbal cues, right? To give you an idea of, are they bored? Do they like this? Are they happy? Are they not? And there'll be moments where the players interact with each other, and that's a lot of times when the DM can take a moment and start reflecting, right? It's like when, if you're in a meeting and you're in a feedback, let's say, meeting, and right after UAT, and you're listening to all of a sudden two users start talking to each other, like, yeah, you know what, that was, really want to sit back and just go, okay, I'm going to take some notes, right? This is your time to take true to life at that real-time moment, those notes. And then that can help those little kind of references that they give you can help you can infer what their state of mind is. Are they excited about things? Or you can kind of just see they're really irritated with what you've kind of brought them. So I think a lot of that stuff kind of comes out while you're playing a game in D&D within the session, right? It depends, right? The DM is always ever present in most of these conversations, but it depends on how much the players want to interact with the world and how much they want to interact with each other. Right? So the DM doesn't usually tell, as I kind of said before with UX, we don't really tell what the players what to do. We don't give them the solution to the problem that's at hand. Sometimes you can give them hints if it lasts too long, like they're really, really stuck. You're like, oh, yeah, we need to move on. All right, let's click on this right there. But you can start to give them some hints. Maybe you can say, hey, the eyes start to glow red or whatever. And then they, oh, I'm going to go look over that thing. And so during the kind of playing of the game, these are things we can look at, like usability testing, right? And these are a set of tests done for a product in order to benchmark accessibility, feasibility, learnability, and competitive edge. These tests can be in person or remotely moderated and allow for the facilitator to collect qualitative and quantitative data. So kind of like what Paulina did with eye tracking, right? These are heuristic evaluations and other types of impression tests. We can actually even get more information once we release a somewhat interactive or simulated product. Yeah, you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, so, part of the session is including new mechanics, right? So these can be homebrewed, optional rules. These can be pulled from adventure stories that both the players and the dungeon master can import into the game. They can be untested, but they have the potential to deepen the player's overall experiences. And what's happening, too, is when you're bringing in new mechanics into the game, you're sort of testing them as you're playing, and then receiving feedback later on to then sort of tweak and then retest as you continue in further sessions. So an example would be in our campaign, Travis had created a mechanic called Sanity, where if you did something that was out of the realm of what your character would experience, or if you did something that was sort of an extreme activity, you would have to roll and then you would lose particular sanity points, right? And that would affect your character in a certain way. So some of the UX activities would be prototyping, testing in real time with a mock-up, low or high fidelity mock-up, and getting that in front of your user base, and then receiving feedback and then making those adjustments. One of the major tools we use is Envision, which is sort of a real-time either mobile or web prototyping tool that you can send out and receive comments or do sort of live sketching. And then you can make tweaks based off of those particular prototypes. Yeah, paper or click-through prototypes.
How many people are using Envision here? Acture?
UX Pin, anybody?
UX
Anybody?
No way, it's
I know like two people that use UX Pin. Yeah.
I try to use it.
I actually, it was all right. It was an all right experience.
When I was trying their design systems,
Huh.
How about XD?
they did not test it.
Anybody use XD as software?
I saw
No,
a
I've
video.
tried it.
It's still in beta. It needs some work. It needs some love. They need to hire a dungeon master to work on it.
But I think overall, if they can get their act together, they can be pretty good.
Yeah.
Remix best value. Remix best value.
For price,
Price per feature.
Vision, I think, is really easy to stand up. It doesn't require a lot, but there is some hard walls that you hit compared to Axure, right? Axure allows you to, if you want to code some stuff, if you're good at simple programming, you can actually build way more interactive prototypes. Whereas InVision gives you these general hotspots and some canned animation and some canned kind of transitions and things like that. So
Yeah.
although I love InVision, but InVision is completely dependent on your design tool.
Right.
Where XD, UXPin, and
Axure.
Axure actually has the design tool built in. So you can't do anything with Axure without having,
With InVision.
I would say that that's a bad comparison. I would compare Sketch more to XD.
True.
InVision is more for.
Well, does Sketch have an
based.
internal? Sketch has an internal
Yeah.
vector.
I feel like
No,
InVision
Sketch
is
doesn't.
more-
Sketch just
So it's not
will
Well, but
push
XD
to
does.
InVision.
XD does.
XD.
Yeah,
XD
and
does.
As soon as they get a lot of features out, more released, more robust features for XD, I think that's going to be. It's going to take somewhat of a leap because they have a click-through prototyping option, and you can design right in the software. So they're trying to get it sort of all encompassing.
The fact that
So does Sketch.
Sketch is a click-through prototyping option.
yeah.
They
I
have
thought they
prototyping,
did.
They have plugins.
but they use InVision.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
XD is promising to use the cloud. So InVision, think of the InVision as your cloud.
Right.
Like that's what InVision is.
And Sketch is a one-time buy on a yearly or bi-yearly basis, whereas to have Adobe, you have to have a very heavy monthly subscription to their cloud services. So there are pros and cons to all these different things, right?
I think the point is there's levels of prototyping that people do, right? There's levels of prototyping to me is to get a vast understanding of the interaction. There are some points where we go into prototyping into a more of a selling aspect where I want to mock it up to almost look exactly like what I'm going to build so I can sell somebody else on it, the business or the users or whoever I'm trying to get money from to build something.
Yeah.
You know, for the most part, prototypes to me are supposed to be quick. And if you're going to put a lot of power into prototypes like Axure, to me it's like it's bloated, it's not fast. You have a lot of overhead on changes, same thing with InVision. And if we're micro prototyping versus big monolithic prototyping, those are two different types of things. And two different tools can accommodate.
And you can prototype wireframes. So if you wanted to within InVision, right, I could make wireframes in Sketch or OmniGraffle, import those into InVision. They could be or balsamic. They could be the ugliest looking thing, but still give me something that simulates a testable environment, right?
So I guess
I feel like this is a conversation we could probably have.
Hell yeah.
I'd like to hear what Axure.
I like that.
I definitely don't have all the experience in Axure. I looked at it. Yeah, I worked with it.
So I'm learning curve with Axure. If you get out, you prototype really fast, and it's really hard to do because the UX team that I work with is extremely small and communicates with users directly. So our engineers look for high fidelity prototypes versus those low fidelity ones. So they want prototypes to look exactly the same as so like they want the exact same.
Yeah.
that would be the point where we want better quality out of our developers, right? You want higher fidelity prototypes so they get a sense for understanding any micro interactions or any interactions going through the process, where low fidelity prototype will not probably give you that.
Yeah.
But it's quicker to test it. So there's two different things going on.
That's why I like Sketch and UX fans approach. Even though I feel like it failed, UX fan is really adopting the whole design system, which gets you to a high fidelity prototype quickly.
So Sketch.
Yeah, Sketch helps you with it too.
Oh yeah.
So I think
It is
that would
hard.
be
It's
great.
there's not
If
one
anybody
that's
wants to
good.
like the conversation on that. I think
Yeah, I
that would
agree.
be awesome.
There could be full on whole community around the prototyping.
No, then we're done. So that brings us to kind of the end result of our session, right, is feedback. Most of the time at the end of a D&D session, I sit down with the players and I ask everybody while it's fresh in their mind how well they think the session went. A lot of times, players, one of the first things they'll say is, well, how did you think it went? And I think we as UXers and as Dungeon Masters should look at everything like we should be Schrodinger's cat. I can't answer that until you answer, right? So Schrodinger's cat, if you guys don't know, is kind of a quantum physics kind of thing where there's a cat inside of a box. And the question is it dead or alive? Well, you don't know. It's inside of a box. You don't know until you open it. So it could be, it's both. It's either or. So that's kind of something that a DM and a UXer should be. We don't know if we're successful until our users, until our players tell us it was successful. And I think that should always be the metric of which we judge ourselves on. And feedback is the core concept of this, right? Where we'll do kind of our post-mortem after our 3-4 hour, sometimes 5-hour session in D&D and get that feedback. And it really helps because I can quickly note on my kind of little note sheet what the players are saying and try to incorporate those in their next session. So the way you looked at this is acceptance testing, right? We get feedback in UAT, user acceptance testing, that lets us know, is it a pass-fail? How well have we been not only achieving things on an interactive level, but on the actual product delivery level, right? Is the product's coming back from the database? Well, even though it's not a UX problem, it's still an issue for our users. And we need to be able to advocate for those users and maybe have a sit-down conversation with the developers to figure out what's going on there. And if there's an opportunity for us to maybe match the developer with the user so they can feel a little bit more comfortable in the quality of the product that we're delivering.
This bodes well more in an agile scenario.
Yes.
You know, the 40 process isn't linear. It doesn't do this. It's this. So as you're coming back around after delivery, I would debate that between delivery and discovery, there is a validation period where I'm validating what I just delivered. I'd hope to validate it before I build it, but you know it's cheaper as you get down that way. But for the general concept of it is that we're not just setting it and forgetting it. I'm not delivering it and leaving. You know, I'm not successful until I've actually achieved what I think is delivery is something that actually worked. So I don't know if it worked unless I validated that process. I can validate things all the way through that process, all the way through the 4D. I can do spot checks and spot tests and things, but at the very end of the day, I'm delivering something that needs to make money or do something for a user. And so I find that sometimes a UX person gets pushed into a scenario where they're popped onto a project for 2 weeks. And they're just, hey, could you clean this up? We already did some of this stuff. Yeah, we did some discovery, which they didn't. You know, they didn't find problems, they didn't find anything. So, you know, but you're coming in as a designer and a visual designer, and you're just cleaning up some bullshit. And as you're coming out of it, you don't, and you leave, and there's like nobody saying that it worked or not, and then you're completely.
I always call that, Matt, like we become more auditors, and when we do that, it's really hard to show to both stakeholders and users the value when you're only on it for one, maybe two sprints. because that's not long enough to truly get invested, right, in whatever product that you're building. And I think that is a fallacy that we all kind of fall into just because it's kind of sometimes we have to do things that we don't want to do. But it's never a good idea to just be an auditor of a system, whether it's a design audit, whether we need to go back and we need a new discovery sprint to kind of figure out this new little feature. You're still kind of auditing what already exists. And
regardless of who did the process, somebody did the process.
Yep.
They either did it badly or did, where we come in as an auditor, we're now validating what has been done in that swoop of 4Ds. From there, it's our time to sell our involvement, saying we could have been in front of this, we could have actually
100%.
saved you money. So what you're doing on the validation is proving that they wasted money because they didn't actually do the process right. And so that part of our, what I'm advocating for is most people on a UX or on a development team, when they're plopped into a situation like that, use it at your advantage. Don't use it as like, hey, that's all they wanted, blah, blah. That's your time to sell yourself or sell that process back into yourself by saying, this is the things I saw. I did a heuristic evaluation of the things you just did. Failed almost all 10 on all the process that I did. From that point, I could have saved you this X amount of money by me being in front of that and working that process better. And you're selling the process. You're not selling yourself. You're not selling UX. You're selling the process. And the 4D process is the process that we all should be adhering to.
Yep.
And you're probably going to go into it, but you can apply that 4D process to anything in your life.
We're definitely going to be bringing that up. So we only got a couple more slides left. And I really wanted to kind of bring home, Jason, you can talk about this.
Yeah,
about
so after some research, not much, but some, we found that a lot of companies are using D&D in their workplace, hiring professional DMs to come in and run games for their employees because they're trying to promote team collaboration and problem solving. And a lot of this stuff incorporates, that into the game and then teaches them how to communicate, how to solve for different issues in real time.
We could have an entire thing. We could do a whole other thing about how D&D teaches you to be a better communicator. I mean, we could do another 30 or 40 slides that are all dealing with that. I mean, that's how I'm actually amazed at what D&D actually does on that end, because it's so much of it, we call it theater of the mind. So much of it is inside your head and the collective's head, right? When you read a book from J.K. Rowling, she describes characters, but she describes them enough where everybody who learns about Sirius Black knows who he is. And I could tell you a few little key features and everyone would know, oh, that's who you're talking about. And I think that's a huge key in the success of us as UXers, because one of the primary things that we do, we are the nexus between the business, the technology, and the user. And if we can't have good communication between all of ourselves and those other kind of key factors, those key points, I think that's worse for the end product. And we're gonna.
No, I just have a question though.
Yes.
You didn't touch, at least I didn't hear you touch on time, like the time of the D&D event. But now, and maybe it doesn't really matter, it's as long as it needs to be. But now with the D&D in the workplace, you've got time constraints. Do you know how long they would put together campaigns?
It depends. So I know that Google used to dedicate, I think, 5 hours a week or something to specific campaigns, whether it's broken out into one or more. But they weren't. In the beginning, we talked about time commitment and the adventure types like one shots and modules and stuff. They're really bought in for quick one shots, 1 to 2 hours, for people to just come together, collaborate, problem solve for a specific scenario, and then that's it for that particular week. And then the next week they can come back and either continue or start something new if there's new people coming in. But it varies.
In the Google Venture Design System, though, there is a dedicated time for planning and design. You could cut that up, and you could talk to more about that as far as the time it takes to plan in Google Ventures. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a few days.
They take like 3 days.
Yeah.
The first 3 days. Is that your question? Is how it relates to some of the real practices, some of the activities that we take?
Yeah, or you're more referring to cost.
It was just a really interesting team building kind of thing that I'd never considered before.
Yeah.
And so now all of a sudden I have. I don't know how, I don't know the practicality of it. You're saying that somebody's prepared to come in and do this and take a team in 1 to 2 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that it's harder for the dungeon master that's like a dungeon master that works at Facebook. That's why they actually hire people to come in, because they're the primary facilitator. You can just come in as a player and like this. Oops. This has pre-designed player characters. I can just hand you a sheet. Here's who you are, or here, you pick one of these. And then I start to facilitate the entire experience, right? And so the stand-up, kind of how quickly it is to stand up an adventure is very small. We could have 2 to 3 hours, and some of these things could even be done after hours, or team building exercises that you do maybe once a quarter. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there, but the DM definitely has to put in some more hours. And if you have an experienced DM, it makes that experience more fluid, right?
That actually is a good point. You're the facilitator of these things. I find that in a good user experience scenario, we are the facilitator of the stories.
100%.
And we're guiding the COA of those stories. We're guiding the understanding of why we're doing it, what it's achieving us business-wise, if you're that into that part of it.
We facilitate action on even the business level, right? As we see pain points, we realize that there's a gap here. And then we go and we reach out to the stakeholders or the product owners. And we start to facilitate some change around what we see. Or vice versa. We hear stakeholders talk about something. Maybe we want to talk to our development team and maybe leverage different technology types. So it's to look at all those different avenues that's why I said we are that center nexus. We are the glue that holds the entire team together. And I think that having that good, solid communication where everyone's on the same page, because we're able to communicate in a clear and concise manner, I think is something that we need to always continue to iterate on. The last piece here is, I kind of want to ask all of you, what are some other activities you guys think in your life kind of can follow the same 4D UX process? And one of my examples I threw out is cooking, right? Because think about when you cook, a lot of times we experiment. Maybe it's something you've never tried before. You've never tried to cook Italian food. And you experiment with different spices and maybe different meats and mixed with vegetables. And then you present that to your family, yourself, or maybe you're an actual cook at a restaurant and you get feedback related to that. And you have to iterate and come up with, oh man, I put way too much time in this particular meal. I'm going to modify, I'm going to adjust it. And I want to implore all you guys to go out there and look at in your life where those, maybe it's a thing that you do on the weekends, where you can apply that UX 4D process in your life. But anyway, you guys have any examples? Can anybody come up with anything else that they think that kind of has something similar to our discover, define, design, and deliver?
Costume making.
Oh yeah, yes. 100% costume making.
What's that?
Yeah, costume making.
Costume making.
Yeah.
There's so much research, and also if you're going to wear it to an event, also like incorporating like how it's going to be received at the event, and then usually when you go there, like adjusting things based off of how it's wearing.
I think the level of I like the cooking thing because it's a little more iterative on that point. There's some things that are like costly to iterate, but you got to find the way to be able to cut it up into smaller chunks and be able to work through it.
I was even thinking about the way that a lot of times we research products. I mean, there is some iteration on, we're not really creating anything, but when we see something that we like or that we want, we may go to a dealership and have a test drive, right? And, oh, that's bad. I don't want to spend $30,000. And then we go and we have to maybe go through the entire process again and research. That actually happened to me when I was looking for a car a couple years ago. I did all this initial research, but then I got into the driver's seat. And it was off. It didn't fit me right. I didn't like any of it. And it really upset me because it was the car that I really, really wanted. But once I got into the driver's seat, I realized through some small set of user testing that it wasn't the car for me. And I had to go through the entire kind of research and discovery process all over again. So that's it for us, guys. Jason, do you want to...
So I'm going to pass out these little sheets of paper, and you guys can write your names on them.
Yeah.
I was counting them out,
This is
so it's like a
raffle for the two. For
Thank
one
you.
Of the two winners.
Yeah, we're giving these away. There's starter sets. The inside here is a standard basic rule set. It's not the full-fledged player's handbook, but it is rules along with dice and a pre-built adventure story and 5 pre-built characters. So if you're interested in the game and you want to take some of what we had talked about tonight and experiment with the 4D process of D&D and then translate that into your own UX world, you can do so.
How many people do you recommend to play?
4 to 5 is I would recommend. An experienced DM could probably get through with 7 or 8, but it's still, what it does is it slows down the game. The more people that want to do things, the more, because it's kind of an analog one-to-one process, right? You have to request something. I then have to interpret that. Jim Bob over there, you're Jim Bob, by the way. Yeah. Hi, Jim Bob. Then Jim Bob actually has to ask for something, and then I have to interpret that. So the more times you have to do that, the more you kind of have to go back to the well. So
We do have some more like UX and AZ announcements. I'm still working on the user or the UXmas party in December. I'm trying to work up some sponsorship for that. Show of hands, just in this room. If I was able to procure an area that we can have a party for you, spouses, whatever you want, but have a $10 entry fee or something to help pay for the cost of the beer and the food and stuff in the space, would that be something that would work? I'm hoping for